Please don't make her leave. The little girl's voice cracked through the restaurant like a note from a forgotten song. Soft, but impossible to ignore. Conversation stalled. Crystal glasses hovered halfway to waiting lips. Even the gentle piano drifting through the dining room seemed to lose its place for a moment. At the center of the silence stood 7-year-old Sophie Whitmore, her small arms wrapped tightly around the waist of a black waitress she had met less than an hour ago. And no matter what anyone said, she refused to let go. The restaurant sat on the 42nd floor of a luxury tower overlooking downtown Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a sea of lights stretching toward the Hudson River. Every table shimmered beneath warm amber chandeliers. Venture capitalists discussed mergers. Athletes celebrated endorsement deals. Influencers posed beside plates that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. It was the kind of place where power came dressed in tailored suits and expensive smiles. Yet on this particular evening, nobody was looking at the skyline. Nobody cared about the celebrities seated near the private lounge. Every eye was fixed on one crying child and the waitress she would not release. Sophie, her father said gently, kneeling beside her. Sweetheart, we have to go. Usually those words worked. Usually Sophie obeyed. She had been raised to be polite, disciplined, and composed in public. But tonight was different. Her fingers tightened against the black apron. Tears rolled down her cheeks. No, she whispered. Then louder. No, I want to stay with her. The guests exchanged confused glances. Some quietly pulled out their phones. Others leaned closer, curious about the unfolding scene. Ethan Whitmore felt every stare in the room. At 42, he was one of the most recognizable CEOs in America. Founder of Whitmore Dynamics. Billionaire. Magazine covers. Television interviews. A man whose decisions could move markets before breakfast. Yet none of that power helped him now, because his daughter was looking at him as though he were asking her to leave behind something precious. And he had no idea why. Beside Sophie stood Naomi Brooks, 27 years old, 5'8", calm eyes, simple uniform, the kind of presence people rarely noticed until they truly looked. She seemed just as confused as everyone else. Sir, she said quietly, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. Ethan believed her. The woman looked genuinely uncomfortable with the attention. She hadn't encouraged any of this. If anything, she seemed worried about the child clinging to her. Sophie buried her face against Naomi's side. Please don't go. Naomi hesitated before gently resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. I'm right here, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Somehow those 6 words made Sophie cry harder. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. For months he had searched for ways to reach his daughter. Therapists, counselors, specialists, family retreats, private schools. Every expert offered suggestions. Every solution seemed to work for a few days before fading away. Since losing her mother 3 years earlier, Sophie had slowly retreated behind walls nobody could climb. She smiled less, spoke less, trusted less. Sometimes entire afternoons passed without her saying more than a few sentences. Yet tonight, in the span of a single dinner service, she had attached herself completely to a stranger. It made no sense. The restaurant manager approached cautiously. Mr. Whitmore, would you like us to prepare a private room? Ethan barely heard him. His attention had shifted elsewhere. Around Naomi's neck hung a delicate silver chain. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just a simple necklace resting against the fabric of her uniform. Ethan stared for a second longer than he intended. A strange feeling brushed across his memory. Familiar, unsettling, almost impossible. He blinked and looked again. The necklace swayed gently as Sophie tightened her grip. For the first time all evening, a flicker of color drained from Ethan Whitmore's face. Because the necklace looked exactly like one he had not seen in years. One he had believed was gone forever. One connected to a memory he had spent 3 years trying to survive. And while the rest of the restaurant wondered why a little girl refused to leave a waitress, Ethan suddenly found himself asking a very different question. How did this woman end up wearing something that belonged to the most important person he had ever lost? The dining room slowly came back to life, but the energy had changed. Conversations resumed in whispers. Curious glances lingered longer than they should have. Somewhere near the windows, a waiter carefully refilled a glass of sparkling water. A pianist found the melody he had lost minutes earlier. Yet for Ethan Whitmore, The entire 42nd floor seemed to narrow into a single point. A silver necklace resting against the uniform of a woman he had never met. Sophie still refused to move. She stood beside Naomi now, one small hand wrapped around hers, as if letting go might cause something precious to disappear forever. Ethan rose to his feet, forcing himself to remain calm. Years in boardrooms had taught him how to hide surprise. Investors trusted leaders who controlled their emotions. Competitors feared leaders who never looked shaken. But this was different. This was personal. More personal than any acquisition, negotiation, or billion-dollar decision he had ever faced. He looked carefully at the necklace again. A simple silver chain. A small pendant shaped like a delicate star. Time had worn its edges smooth. Most people would have overlooked it entirely. Ethan could not, because he remembered buying it. 14 years ago, a rainy Saturday afternoon in Boston. Before the company. Before the private jets. Before the magazine covers. Back when he and his wife used to spend entire weekends wandering city streets with coffee cups in their hands and no schedule to follow. He remembered her smile when she saw the pendant displayed in a small jewelry shop window. He remembered pretending not to notice, then secretly returning later to buy it as a surprise. Some memories do not fade. They simply wait. And suddenly that memory was standing 10 feet away, hanging from a stranger's neck. Naomi noticed his expression. Her eyes dropped briefly toward the pendant, then back to Ethan. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked. Ethan opened his mouth, but found no immediate answer. Sophie answered for him. "Daddy keeps looking at her necklace." Naomi glanced down again. "Oh." Her fingers instinctively touched the pendant. "This old thing." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "How long have you had it?" Naomi seemed surprised by the question. "Several years." She gave a small laugh. "Honestly, I never thought much about it." Ethan stared. "Several years." The words echoed in his mind. The manager quietly escorted nearby guests farther away, sensing the conversation had become private. Even Sophie grew unusually still. Children often understand emotional gravity before adults realize it exists. Naomi shifted her weight slightly. "Is something wrong?" Ethan finally spoke. "That necklace looks familiar." Naomi nodded politely, though confusion remained in her eyes. "I suppose a lot of jewelry looks similar." "Not this one." His voice came out softer than intended. "Not this one." For a moment, nobody spoke. Beyond the glass windows, New York shimmered beneath the night sky. Yellow taxis crawled through traffic 30 stories below. A helicopter crossed the distance between skyscrapers like a blinking star. The city kept moving. Yet here, time seemed frozen. Sophie squeezed Naomi's hand. "I told you," she whispered. Naomi looked down. "Told me what?" Sophie hesitated, then quietly said, "It feels like mommy." The words landed gently. No drama. No outburst. Just the simple honesty only a child can offer. Ethan looked away toward the windows. The familiar ache returned instantly. 3 years had passed since his wife, Claire, left the world far too soon. 3 years of trying to be both father and mother. 3 years of pretending strength was the same thing as healing. Some days he convinced himself he was succeeding. Other days he saw the sadness in Sophie and realized grief had merely changed shape. Naomi's expression softened. She knelt slightly to meet Sophie's eyes. "Your mother must have been very special." Sophie nodded. "She was." A tiny smile appeared. The first genuine smile Ethan had seen all evening. She wore a star necklace too. Naomi froze. Not dramatically, just enough for Ethan to notice. Her fingers tightened around the pendant. A shadow of memory flickered across her face and disappeared almost immediately. It was subtle, so subtle most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. Because for the first time since this strange evening began, Naomi Brooks looked less confused and more unsettled. And deep inside, a question she had never expected to answer was beginning to wake up. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, her fingers still resting against the small silver star. The restaurant seemed quieter now, as though even the city outside the glass walls was waiting for an answer. She took a slow breath. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I probably look strange." Ethan shook his head. No, his voice was calm, but his attention never left the necklace. "You look like someone trying to remember something." A faint smile touched Naomi's face. "Maybe that is exactly what I am doing." Sophie stayed close beside her. For some reason, the little girl seemed completely at ease near Naomi. The anxiety that usually clouded her eyes had faded. She looked comfortable, safe, seen. Ethan noticed it immediately. It had been months since he had witnessed that expression. Naomi glanced toward the windows before speaking again. The truth is, I do not know much about this necklace. Ethan felt his chest tighten. You do not. She shook her head. Not really. Her gaze drifted somewhere far away. Somewhere beyond Manhattan. Beyond the restaurant. Beyond the present moment itself. I know it sounds strange, but I was not the one who bought it. Sophie listened carefully. Children always know when a story matters. Then who did? Naomi hesitated. I wish I knew. The answer surprised all three of them. She gave a small nervous laugh. That sounds ridiculous, does it not? Ethan remained silent. Naomi continued. I grew up in Newark. My mother worked long shifts at a nursing home. Most days she left before sunrise and came home after dark. We never had much money, but she taught me something important. Her voice softened. She always said kindness has a longer memory than success. Ethan found himself listening more closely than he intended. Naomi was not speaking to impress anyone. She was simply telling the truth. And truth has a different sound. After high school, I worked wherever I could. Grocery stores, coffee shops, retail, anything that helped pay bills. She smiled slightly. Nothing glamorous. Sophie tilted her head. But now you work here. Now I work here, Naomi agreed. And I am grateful for it. She looked around the elegant dining room. Most people see luxury when they walk into a place like this. I mostly see opportunities to pay rent on time. The honesty drew an unexpected laugh from Ethan. It was brief, but real. Naomi noticed. See? I can still make billionaires laugh. For the first time that evening, a tiny spark of warmth entered the conversation. Then her expression changed again. The smile faded. Her fingers found the necklace once more. But there was a period in my life when things were harder than they are now. Ethan felt the atmosphere shift immediately. How long ago? About 6 years. Her answer came quietly. I was 21. The silver star turned slowly between her fingertips. I remember feeling completely lost. Not hopeless. Just invisible. The word lingered in the air. Invisible. It was a feeling she knew well. Working double shifts. Watching people look through her instead of at her. Carrying dreams nobody else could see. One afternoon, everything changed. Ethan noticed something unusual. Naomi was choosing her words carefully now, almost as though she were walking through an old memory one step at a time. I had just finished a job interview. She smiled without humor. The kind where you know the answer before you leave the room. Ethan understood immediately. Rejection often arrives before the official email does. I remember sitting alone at a bus stop, thinking about bills, thinking about my mother, thinking about how tired I was of disappointing people. Sophie reached for Naomi's hand again. Naomi squeezed it gently. Then someone sat beside me. Ethan felt a strange sensation move through him. Instinct. Anticipation. Something he could not explain. A woman, he asked. Naomi nodded slowly. Yes. Her eyes never left the pendant now. A woman. Silence followed. The piano continued somewhere in the distance. Glasses clinked softly. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. But inside Naomi's memory, another scene was beginning to emerge. One she had not revisited in years. One connected somehow to the silver star resting against her heart. And as Ethan watched her expression carefully, he realized something else. Naomi Brooks was not simply remembering a stranger. She was remembering someone who had changed the course of her life forever. Naomi's voice grew quieter as the memory settled fully into place. The restaurant around them seemed to disappear. The city lights beyond the glass became distant stars. Even Sophie remained perfectly still, listening with a level of focus that surprised her father. I never learned that woman's full name, Naomi said. At least I thought I never did. Ethan felt his heart begin to pound. There was something different in her tone now. Something certain. After she gave me the necklace, we talked for maybe 15 minutes. That was all. Naomi smiled softly at the memory. But she spoke to me as if I mattered. Not like a customer. Not like a stranger. Like someone who genuinely believed I had a future. Sophie squeezed Naomi's hand. What did she say? Naomi looked down at the little girl. She told me that difficult seasons do not last forever. She said the world would try to convince me that my value depended on my job title, my paycheck, or other people's opinions. Then she said something I never forgot. Naomi's eyes glistened slightly. She said, "Never let anyone decide how much you are worth." The words landed with the weight of a memory that had survived years untouched. Ethan lowered his gaze immediately. He knew those words. Not because they sounded familiar. Because he had heard them hundreds of times before. Claire used to say them to everyone. Employees, friends, students, neighbors, even strangers. It was one of her favorite beliefs. One of the principles she carried through life. Naomi continued. Before she left, she took off the necklace and handed it to me. I tried to refuse. It looked valuable. But she insisted. A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. Ethan noticed it. Immediately. She told me that one day I would understand why she wanted me to have it. Naomi looked toward the pendant. Honestly, I spent years wondering what she meant. Ethan could barely breathe. The final pieces were moving into place faster than he could process them. There was something else, Naomi added. Something I never thought about until tonight. Ethan looked up. What? Naomi hesitated. The woman showed me a picture. The room seemed to stop. Sophie blinked. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. A picture. Naomi nodded slowly. She kept it inside her wallet. Her eyes moved from Sophie to Ethan. It was a little girl. Silence. Absolute silence. Sophie stared back at her. Ethan could not move. Naomi's voice softened even further. Blonde hair. Big smile. Missing one front tooth. Sophie's mouth fell open. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. Because he remembered that photograph. Claire carried it everywhere. She loved that picture. Sophie had been 4 years old when it was taken at a summer carnival in Connecticut. Claire had laughed for days afterward because Sophie refused to smile without showing the missing tooth. Naomi swallowed carefully. The woman looked at the picture and told me that her daughter was the greatest gift she had ever received. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. That was me. Naomi looked at her. Then at Ethan. Then back at the photograph forming inside her own memory. Suddenly she understood. Not part of it. All of it. The star necklace. The familiar words. The picture. The timing. The impossible connection. Her hands slowly covered her mouth. Oh my God. Ethan could not stop the tears gathering in his eyes. For 3 years he had searched for traces of Claire. Old voicemails. Videos. Letters. Anything that made her feel close again. And now, standing in the middle of a Manhattan restaurant, he was listening to a woman who had unknowingly carried one of Claire's final acts of kindness through 6 years of her life. Naomi looked at Sophie with complete understanding now. You recognized it, didn't you? Sophie nodded through tears. I knew it felt like Mommy. Naomi's own eyes filled. She helped me become the person I am today. Ethan finally looked at the waitress who had entered his life only hours earlier. For the first time all evening, neither of them saw a billionaire CEO or a restaurant employee. They saw 2 people connected by the same extraordinary woman. And neither of them was prepared for what that realization would mean. Ethan Whitmore took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the weight of every second stretch into eternity. He stepped closer to Naomi, but not in a confrontational way. His movements were deliberate, careful, as though approaching fragile glassware that could shatter with the slightest touch. Sophie remained close, her small hand still entwined with Naomi's, a silent anchor for both of them. Ethan spoke, his voice soft, yet carrying a gravity that made the surrounding staff fall silent once more. I cannot believe this, he said, almost to himself. Naomi looked up at him, uncertainty in her eyes, yet an understanding that the conversation had transcended ordinary words. I never knew, he continued, that something so small could carry so much meaning. All this time, I have searched for a way to connect with Sophie. I thought I had tried everything. And yet, this necklace, this woman, this moment, it has done what I could not. His eyes scanned Naomi Brooks' calm, composed face, and for the first time, he truly saw her, not as a waitress, not as a stranger, but as the keeper of something profoundly important. Sophie looked up at her father, her own eyes glistening with tears, yet radiant with recognition and trust. Daddy, she reminds me of Mommy, she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the impact of her words. He remembered Claire's laugh, her patient voice, her endless capacity to nurture. He realized that the reason Sophie had clung so tightly to Naomi was because she recognized the echoes of her mother's warmth in the simplest gestures, a reassuring smile, a gentle hand, the quiet attention that spoke louder than any words. Naomi shifted slightly, meeting Sophie's gaze with quiet tenderness, her voice barely above a whisper. "She is very special," Naomi said, "and so is your daughter." Ethan's chest swelled, with emotion he had long suppressed. Pride, relief, gratitude, and a deep, aching love intertwined within him. He knelt slowly, placing a hand on Sophie's small shoulder, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat, the steady rhythm of her presence, a reminder of everything that truly mattered beyond wealth, status, and power. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the city beyond the windows faded into a soft, shimmering backdrop as the connection between these three individuals became the focal point of the evening. Ethan's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming intensity of revelation. "Naomi," he said, "I do not know how to thank you." Naomi's lips curved into a gentle smile. "You do not need to. I only did what anyone who cared would have done." Sophie's small hand tightened its grip on Naomi's, her smile tentative yet genuine. Ethan realized that in that moment, all the searching, all the attempts to bridge the distance between father and daughter had been answered by a simple act of kindness, by presence, and by recognition of what truly mattered. He took another breath, feeling a quiet resolve settle over him. The rest of the restaurant existed in a blur, the sounds of cutlery, quiet conversation, and distant piano notes merging into an indistinct backdrop. Inside, a small universe had crystallized around Naomi, Sophie, and himself. The necklace glinted faintly under the warm chandelier light, a symbol of a chain that connected the past, present, and future in ways Ethan could hardly articulate. He reached out once more, brushing a stray strand of hair from Sophie's face, looking first at his daughter, then at Naomi. "You have given us a gift," he said, his voice firm yet tender, "that I cannot put into words. You have reminded us of what truly matters." Naomi's eyes softened, understanding fully that her quiet presence, her patience, and the unassuming way she had allowed Sophie to see what she needed to see had created a bridge between a father and his daughter. For the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore felt a sense of peace settle over him. A moment that could have been ordinary had become extraordinary, a memory that would forever anchor his relationship with Sophie. Sophie hugged Naomi once more, laughing softly through her tears. Ethan allowed himself a small smile, a rare, unguarded expression. The world outside remained unchanged, but inside the elegant dining room, a transformation had quietly occurred. Hearts connected, understanding bloomed, and a family that had been fragmented by grief began to heal, all because one person had simply been present when it mattered the most. For a long moment, none of them moved. The emotional storm that had swept through the evening had finally begun to settle, leaving behind something quieter and far more powerful. Ethan stood near the table, watching his daughter laugh softly as Naomi showed her how the tiny star pendant caught the chandelier light. It was a simple moment. No grand speeches. No dramatic gestures, yet it felt more valuable than deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Because for the first time in years, Sophie looked genuinely happy. Ethan realized something uncomfortable then, something he had spent years avoiding. After Claire passed away, he had convinced himself that providing for Sophie was enough. He gave her the best schools, the best tutors, the best vacations, the safest home, every opportunity money could create. Whenever guilt appeared, he answered it with another gift. Whenever grief surfaced, he buried himself deeper in work. It felt responsible, productive, necessary. But standing here now, he saw the truth with painful clarity. Sophie had never been asking for more things. She had been asking for him. The realization struck harder than any business failure ever could. Naomi noticed the change in his expression. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Ethan smiled, though his eyes shimmered. "I think I am finally becoming honest." Naomi tilted her head slightly. Ethan glanced towards Sophie before answering. "For years I told myself I was doing everything a father should do." His voice remained calm, but I was measuring success the same way I measured business. Results, performance, solutions. He let out a quiet breath. Children do not need solutions all the time. Sometimes they just need someone to sit beside them. Naomi nodded slowly. She understood immediately. Sophie looked between them, sensing the seriousness of the conversation without fully understanding it. Ethan crouched down beside his daughter. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie nodded. Have you been lonely? The question hung in the air. Sophie lowered her eyes. Then she nodded once. The answer was small, but it felt enormous. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. There it was. The truth he had been too afraid to hear. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck. I know you love me, Daddy. Her voice was soft. I just miss talking to you. Ethan's heart broke and healed at the same time. He hugged her tightly, not because she was fragile, because she was brave enough to tell him the truth. Around them, the restaurant continued operating as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Plates arrived. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Yet for Ethan Whitmore, the entire world had shifted. He pulled back slightly and looked at Sophie. I am sorry. The words came naturally. No boardroom language. No carefully prepared explanation. Just honesty. I should have listened better. Sophie smiled through her tears. You can start now. Naomi quietly looked away, giving them space. But Ethan stopped her before she could leave. Wait. She turned. There is something you should know. Naomi paused. Ethan looked directly at her. Tonight, you did not just help my daughter. His voice grew emotional. You helped me see her again. Naomi's eyes softened. Ethan continued. Claire changed your life years ago without realizing what that kindness would become. And tonight, you returned that gift to our family. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Naomi smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that reaches the eyes first. I think she would be happy knowing that. Ethan looked toward the silver star. I think she would too. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered beneath the dark sky. Inside, grief that had lived in silence for years finally began to loosen its grip. Not because the pain disappeared. Not because the loss became easier. But because three people had discovered something Claire had understood all along. Love does not end when someone is gone. Sometimes it continues quietly through kindness, through memories, through unexpected connections, and through the people whose lives we touch without ever knowing how far the impact will travel. And as Ethan watched Sophie smile beside Naomi, he realized that the most important inheritance Claire had left behind was not money, possessions, or success. It was the ability to make another human being feel seen. Tonight, that gift had found its way home. The evening should have ended there. A few final words. A polite goodbye. Three people returning to separate lives connected only by a remarkable coincidence. But life rarely follows the endings we expect. Sophie was the first to notice the time. The dining room had thinned considerably. Several tables sat empty now. The skyline beyond the windows glowed against the midnight sky. Yet she still stood beside Naomi as though leaving had never crossed her mind. Do you work tomorrow? Sophie asked. Naomi smiled. I do. Will you be here? Naomi laughed softly. Most likely. Sophie nodded as if processing important information. Then she turned toward her father. Can we come back? Ethan almost laughed at how quickly the request arrived. Not because it surprised him. Because it felt wonderfully normal. For years, conversations with Sophie had often been brief and guarded. Tonight she was asking questions. Making plans. Looking forward to something. It felt like watching sunlight return after a very long winter. I think we can manage that, Ethan replied. Sophie's smile widened immediately. Naomi looked down, clearly touched by the child's sincerity. You do not have to come back just because of me. Sophie shook her head. I know. Then she paused. I want to come back because I like being here. Ethan exchanged a glance with Naomi. Both understood what Sophie truly meant. For the first time in years, she had found a place that felt emotionally safe. A place where she could talk about her mother without people becoming uncomfortable. A place where memories did not feel like wounds. Naomi slowly removed the silver star necklace from around her neck. Ethan watched in surprise. Sophie looked, equally confused. Naomi knelt carefully in front of the little girl. There is something I have been thinking about, she said. Sophie's eyes followed the pendant resting in Naomi's hand. Your mother gave this to me when I needed hope. Naomi's voice remained gentle. For 6 years I carried it because it reminded me that kindness matters. She looked at the star for a moment before continuing. But tonight I realized something important. Ethan felt emotion rising again before she even finished. Naomi placed the necklace into Sophie's small hands. It belongs with you. Sophie stared at the pendant in shock. No, Naomi smiled. Yes, but it is yours. Naomi shook her head. It was never really mine. I was just taking care of it until the right person came along. Tears filled Sophie's eyes instantly. Ethan could not speak. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of 6 years, a chance encounter, and a mother's legacy. Sophie carefully wrapped her fingers around the star. Thank you. Naomi reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Whenever you miss her, remember something. Sophie nodded. What? Naomi smiled. The people who love us leave pieces of themselves everywhere. In memories. In lessons. In kindness. That means your mother is still helping people, even today. Ethan finally looked away, overwhelmed by the truth of those words. Claire had helped Naomi years ago without expecting anything in return. That single act of compassion had traveled through time and somehow found its way back to her own family. Not through money. Not through influence. Through kindness. Ethan understood something then. Legacy was not what appeared in annual reports or headlines. Legacy was what remained in another person's heart long after you were gone. As they prepared to leave, Sophie surprised everyone one final time. She hugged Naomi tightly, then stepped back and smiled. A real smile. Bright. Unforced. The kind Ethan had not seen in far too long. See you tomorrow, Sophie said confidently. Naomi laughed. See you tomorrow. Father and daughter finally walked toward the elevator together. But this time something had changed. Sophie reached for Ethan's hand. Before he could offer it, he squeezed gently. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Just before stepping inside, Ethan turned back toward Naomi. Thank you, he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. Thank Claire. The doors slowly closed. As the elevator descended through the Manhattan skyline, Sophie leaned against her father and held the silver star close to her heart. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Some nights change everything without making a sound. And somewhere above them, in a restaurant filled with warm light and fading conversations, a waitress returned to work unaware that she had just reunited a father with his daughter, healed a piece of a broken family, and reminded them both of a truth more valuable than anything money could ever buy. Power can fill a room. Success can build an empire. But kindness is what survives.